All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching Daybreak on Trust TV. Time for us to take a look at the dailies on Daybreak to have a sense of what the papers are saying this morning about our country and our countrymen. The beginning is the Daily Trust newspaper, is what we start with, and the lead story on the Daily Trust newspaper this morning. Over 500 Nigerian students stranded at Sudan-Egypt border. It has writers that says our passports seized, we have no food, water, students say. And that's according to the students in Sudan. We are doing our best, envoy. NAV planes land in Egypt. Ceasefire ends. Dangote partners FG. Air peace on resettling evacuees. So the ceasefire ends today. You could see a pictorial there showing you Saudi Royal Navy officers assist a child on board their ship as they evacuate Saudis and other nationals from Sudan. Stranded Nigerian students in a bus. So these are the two pictures side by side. Also you have above the lead story, agents kick over 100% increase in cargo handling charges. And then you also have we are ready for census, awaiting Tinubu, NPC says, and that's on page 5. Drunk Kwara police officer excretes in uniform. CP orders arrest. You'd find that on page 17. Now, below the pictorial, you'd also see other stories that says, bandits kill 40 in Kebbi and Zamfara. Edo farmer commits suicide after stabbing wife over infidelity. And that's on page 16. 4.3 million face severe hunger in Borno, Adamawa, Yobe. WFP, World Food Program, that is. Now you have also APC, legal advisor seeks Northwest Vice Chair's expulsion. And that's on page 10, talking about political stories. These are the main stories on the Daily Trust newspaper this morning.
All right, we'll move on to Nigeria News Direct this morning, and it is staying with a different kind of story as the major headline. No plans to phase out redesigned Naira notes. And that is coming from the Central Bank of Nigeria. And to other stories, inside sources clarify falsehood, media attacks against Polaris Bank. Zenith Bank achieves remarkable 41% growth in gross earnings in Q1 2023. That's quarter 1 2023. And 4 trillion debt recovery. Don't allow few individuals escape with our Commonwealth. And this is coming from the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria. And we have front page pictures there. One of the new Commissioner of Police, Ogun State Command, Yomi, being received by the State Governor, Prince Dapo Abiodun, at the Governor's office in Okemesa, Abeokuta yesterday, as well as the Executive Vice Chair, Nigeria Communications Commission, Professor Umar Ambata, with former Minister of Agriculture, Alhaji Sani Zangwandara, at the residence of Alhaji Musa Gwadebi, former Minister of Labour, during a condolence visit yesterday.
All right. Let's take a look at another paper now. We're talking about the Blueprint newspaper this morning. On the Blueprint newspaper, we have the lead story that says, suit against Adamu's breaches. APC recommends Lukman's expulsion as internal crisis deepens. To invoke party's constitution over NWC members' court action. I'm not threatened. Memo mere opinion, says Lukman. 10th National Assembly, APC members write Adamu, back Akpabio, Jibrin leadership. You also have take advantage of Betara's acceptability, APC urged. You'd find all the details on page 6. Now, directly below the masthead, Buhari's remarks, accept defeat, you lost woefully, Lai tells Atiku and Obi. You have also another story there beside the pictorial. Sudan crisis, Egyptian officials making evacuation of Nigerians difficult. That's according to the federal government. And an indictment, really, if you may, on the Egyptian officials. Well, you also have another story: how Nigeria can address economic challenges, according to World Bank. Lawan Atiku tasked Nigerian workers on hope, hard work. Why Buhari extended CG immigration, Jerry's tenure. You also have AMCON urges accelerated measures to recover 4 trillion naira debt. Police reject 1 million naira bribe, arrest notorious ritualist in Ogun. Group rejects Seplat succession plan, alleges tenure elongation. So the police officer rejecting 1 million naira, I think that's a big story.
It is.
And we should commend the police officer, but we'll look much more into that story later, shortly.
All right, we move on to the Punch newspaper next, and it is keeping faith with the Workers' Day celebration. 8 years scorecard, workers lament hardship, score Buhari governors low on welfare. High cost of living has made nonsense of the minimum wage. 40% pay rise, according to union. Pensioners still earning 500, 750 naira monthly. Economy harsh under Buhari, says retiree. And two other stories there. Unsold goods stock rises by 52%. That's according to manufacturers. Don't attack embassy staff. Ambassadors warn stranded Nigerian students. And FG dumps 5% telecom tax waiver. To other story, opposition rigging claim is fraudulent, according to the federal government. 2 suspects caught concealing cannabis in Gary sacks, and siblings supplies more new naira notes to banks. These are the major stories on the front page of the Punch newspaper.
All right. Now let's look at the Guardian newspaper this morning. The lead story there, of course, as expected, the Workers' Day. It says workers lament 8 years of unkept promises as minimum wage loses value. And that's on page 6. You also have below that again, Lagos-Ibadan road repair misses Fashola's deadline. While Lagos Fund demolished buildings in Ajao Estate. You also have over 2,500 undocumented Nigerian students stranded in Sudan varsities. Nigeria loses $4.5 billion yearly to foreign artisans in construction industry. NIN issuance nears 100 million as government intensifies data harmonization. So that's some good story there. We'll say cheering story on the Guardian newspaper.
All right, we move on to the Vanguard newspaper this morning. May Day, it's been terrible, agonizing for workers. This is coming from the NLC. As workers in oil, electricity, maritime, other sectors grieve over continuous misery, poverty, hopelessness, asks governments to address poverty, insecurity, unemployment, inflation, high cost of living, set agenda for incoming government. And to another big story right there on the front page of the Vanguard, inflation, high interest rates drive stock market lows to 1.01 trillion in April. Market loses over 70% of Q1 gains. Analysts disagree on outlook for May. And then you find pictures there of the CBN governor and the CEO of the Nigerian Exchange, Oscar Onyema, and of course the DG Securities and Exchange Commission, Lamido Yuguda. And to other stories, OPS, that's the organized private sector, urges federal government to suspend proposed new taxes. And Sudan, 637 Nigerians arrive Egyptian border, envoy assures parents and students. To other stories, 17 building marked for demolition in Anambra for harboring gunmen. And no plans to phase out redesigned Naira. On the 17 AFCON, Ugbede's Eaglet begin on a winning note. And to other stories, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, FG apologizes over failure to meet deadline. And Southeast governors, Igbo leaders inaugurate Iwanyanwu as new Ohaneze President General. Those are the major stories on the front page of the Vanguard.
All right. Now, on this day newspaper this morning, let's take a look at the lead story. It says NLC CSO split with judiciary to save Nigeria's democracy. The writer says that INEC has driven a nail into the electoral coffin of the country. NLC threatens to name, shame corrupt judges. You also have TUC kicks against planned privatization of TCN, NIPOST, Federal Medical Centers. Article 1 2023 presidential poll, PDP replies Lai Mohammed. Sudan, Nigerians trapped between Sudan, Egypt, send SOS. These are the main stories here on this day.
And to the Daily Times. Niger Delta militants resume hostilities, bomb oil facility, issue more threats. And to other stories, 10th House of Reps leadership, opposition's numerical strength frightening APC. And May Day, workers' wages no longer sustainable, labor laments. And at the top, Anelka at loggerheads with NACO, SACO over 100% cargo height charges. And these are the major stories on the front page of the Daily Times.
All right. Next, the Daily Sun newspaper. The lead story there, fireworks over presidential poll. You lost woefully, FG tells LP and PDP. You have murdered sleep, LP tells APC. History will judge Buhari, that's the PDP. Southeast group clamors for Senate president, backs Kalu. Labour rejects planned privatization of NIPOST, TCN, FMCs. Adama Agoba, why I declared Binani winner, Yunusa Ari, state rec. FG accuses El-Rufai of placing Unity School students' lives in harm's way. Lagos explains demolition of buildings in Ajao Estate. You also have anxiety in Kano over planned review of Sanusi's deposition. That's that for the Daily Sun newspaper.
All right, these are the much we can bring to you at this time. We will take some time to drill deeper into some of the issues that have made the front pages. Starting with our students from Sudan, need I remind us that we'll be having a detailed conversation later on the show with inputs from people who are on the scene of the incidents, but I think we can just glaze over it a bit. There seem to be conflicting, like you did mention, signals from the Nigerian government. One of them is saying the evacuation has been delayed because of the CBN payment system. The other is saying Egyptian authorities are frustrating the evacuation process with demand for visa. The students are crying that they've run out of food, and you know that can cause. And then the ambassador is saying, "Do not attack our embassy." I wonder if we have a Nigerian embassy in the borders, in the deserts of Egypt. I mean, this clearly speaks to how uncoordinated this whole process clearly has been. It's been 5 days thereabout of what has been an absolute confusion. And like I did mention earlier, the government seemed to be just interested in explaining to us how much money they either have spent or are preparing to spend, and justifying why they have to spend that money, rather than showing, you know, really what efforts have been made. I mean, they describe those buses as luxury buses. The buses we saw are not different from the ones we see running from here to Lagos or from here to Onitsha, as the case, at the risk of calling the name of any service provider. What do you make of all of this conflicting and double information that we seem to be getting from?
Well, like you said, it's an indication of lack of coordination from among the officials that are responsible for this. We have NEMA talking to us. We have NIDCOM talking to us. We are supposed to also hear from the Sudan embassy, Nigerian Sudan embassy, and also the Nigerian Egypt embassy here. But I'm not hearing much from that end, which for me, I think that they should be the ones taking over a chunk of what is meant to be done to ensure that to ensure the evacuation of Nigerian students there. So I've not heard anything from the Nigerian Egypt embassy at the moment. Yesterday, we heard from the Sudanese ambassador, that's Nigerian Sudan ambassador, Nigeria's ambassador to Sudan, let me put it that way now. We heard from him where he was trying to absolve himself of all the allegations that we have heard. So we have heard from students who are there initially telling us that there have been an agreement between the Nigerian government and the bus drivers to convey those students from Khartoum to Egypt, and the cost of 40 buses, $1.2 million, just like the Nigerian government have told us. And part of the agreement is to disburse $400,000 initial payment so that they can they can provide the buses, move the students to Egypt, and then after getting to Egypt, the balance of $800,000 will now be paid, to the bus drivers. Only for us to see a video that went viral on social media, one of the students saying the bus drivers decided to stop in the middle of nowhere and saying that they are not going any further until they get their complete payment. And let's not forget that only 13 buses have so far taken the first batch of the Nigerian students. So we are talking 13 buses. We still have remaining 27 now buses still left that have not been provided. So what then happens? And then we are also hearing now that the students' passport have been taken by the bus drivers themselves. So they are in the middle of they are now in the border, from what we learned. They are now in the border, but have been denied access into Egypt. So they are somewhere there, hanging just somewhere in the bush, no water, no no food. As a human being, imagine being displaced for 2 weeks, not having access to water, not having access to proper food. Perhaps I can only imagine that they have to now rely on biscuits if they can find, to sustain themselves. So these are concerns, really, and you can only imagine the trauma that is putting on the parents back here in Nigeria. You have, from the information also that we've gotten, that the Nigerian Air Force planes have landed in Egypt alongside Air Peace aircraft also in Egypt. But then the students are still at the border. So what kind of relationship really does Nigeria has between between our embassies in those countries and the embassies in those countries? Those are the questions that we clearly cannot run away from, because Nigeria is not isolated in this case. We are aware that the Saudi Marines have arrived at the Red Sea point, and they are evacuating even citizens of other Americans who are evacuated to Saudi and they're onward to the United States. What would have stopped Marines or our navies from also sailing to that part of the world and evacuating from there if getting into Egypt was going to be any difficult? What makes it impossible for us to have gone to the same place the Americans and the Saudis are being evacuated and probably get a contingent plan out of that place? And like you rightly mentioned, what kind of relationship do we have with Egypt? Why is it difficult for the Egyptians to understand that this is a crisis situation and some kind of transit visa could be arranged to just get these people through? These students are not coming into Egypt to settle. It's just to see them through on a guided tour to the air facilities where they will be airlifted, where other onward arrangements have been made. So it questions the kind of relationship that we claim to have at a time when we are discussing the Continental Free Trade Agreement and the open skies in
in Africa. And the foreign affairs minister briefed once, and that was it. This is squarely in the realms of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Whatever other agencies are supposed to do, they are supposed to do through the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. So this whole explanation from the Nigerian ministry, where somebody seemed to be asking people to convert whatever payments they are making in dollar to, it doesn't speak of any seriousness by this government to arrest the situation there. It has moved from from a mere fear that people had about this government's irresponsiveness to a real situation where we now have thousands of students stranded in the middle for nowhere. And clearly, if they hadn't had any kind of access to internet to send out their plight, we would not have known. We would probably have just been relying on whatever the government tells us.
Yes, and Sunday, it even gets more worrisome when you think about the fact that the ceasefire ends, and so the ceasefire ends, what then happens? This is a country that has other rebel groups that we are not even talking about. What we know, at the moment is we know about the armed forces and the paramilitary, that's the rapid support forces. But there are other rebel groups, and there are other criminals who may even want to take advantage of the whole situation. So what then happens to our students in those places? So it goes back really also to, like you talked about, the relationship and the issues of diplomatic ties and the rest of them. Really, when we see these officials always traveling to countries to visit each other, Nigeria goes to Egypt, Egypt comes to Nigeria, and the rest, what exactly do they talk about? Isn't it for moments like this where there are difficulties? And isn't it a shame really that we are seeing a repeat of a worse situation of what happened when the Russia-Ukraine war started, and when Nigerian students were denied, or I would say Africans, not only Nigerian students, were denied at some point access to the neighboring countries, to safer zones, and then there was this priority and selective treatment that they got, at the borders, and now even in their own continent, where Nigerians are still facing the same
If you take it to Ukraine, that would be understandable. What can you even say in South Africa here, where we became victims of xenophobic attack? To get our students, it had to take the intervention of an airpiece, to get students back home. We need to begin to prioritize how we treat citizens in this country, and starting from home. Clearly, if we have placed a better premium on lives in this country, then we would understand the need for emergencies. We have fleets of warships, we have fleets of military planes. I don't understand this whole concept of waiting for diplomatic guarantees, whatever that means. Every time we come up with cliches that citizens find very difficult to understand. We're waiting for guarantees from a country that is fighting for its own survival. When the Americans have started evacuating, the Saudis have started evacuating, we were waiting for guarantees because we said to evacuate this kind of numbers were required. Well, I'm not sure whether we got the guarantees or not, but the situation is there's still a long way home for Nigerian students.
Yeah, there are other stories I'd like for us to, just to mention. Yesterday we saw a tragic, a story that announced the killing of 40 people in Kebbi and Zamfara. That's quite a very sad one at the moment like this, just when we thought that, well, we are gradually moving away from that era, or those days where people are being killed in their numbers. We are seeing the story again. At some point, there was some quiet, there was some silence as to banditry attacks and kidnapping and the rest of them. But all of a sudden, it seems like there's a resurgence these days.
Some Nigerians, if you like, are beginning to develop a sense of isolation. It's beginning to feel that this government has completely lost whiff to continue to sustain the fight, because as we moved towards the elections, the president repeatedly guaranteed that we will have a peaceful election. And to his credit, these issues were arrested, at least brought to the barest minimum. The elections held, which it does appear is the only interest of the elite. Now that they have gotten what they want, it appears that we are back in the trenches. We hope that the new administration already has plans to arrest this situation.
Well, other stories were mentioned Sunday, just before we go. The police officer that rejected 1 million naira, from is it ritualist or what? It's a 1 million naira bribe he rejected. On the flip side of it, we are seeing another police officer who got drunk to the point that he excreted in his uniform.
Yes, one brought honor to the force, the other one brought disgrace and shame. We hope that the authorities who are in charge of rewards and punishment will take note of these two parallel display by these policemen, and then appropriately reward the one who has brought glory to the uniform, to encourage similar dispositions by his other contemporaries.